thrilled this weekend. Actually, I think that we really hit a jackpot here because not only do we have a live composer from this weekend's concert in attendance today, but we also have a poet. And these two men they're going to talk to you a little bit today and tell you about what we have going on. But anyway, I want you to take a look at the season if you have a chance to. Before we get started here, Diana is going to tell us about a wine. We're going to have wine, and then I'm going to introduce the composer and our poet. Okay, Diana.
Which we purchase fruit from different parts of California to make these wines. And then we have our Cathedral Mountain label, which we source fruit from our vineyard in Alpine, Texas, which is photographed there on the wall behind you, a high desert plateau, about 80 miles north of Big Bend National Park. Today we're going to do a rosé. This is our 2013 rosé. We just released this. It is a rosé of Syrah, and the fruit is coming from Lake County, California, which is just a little bit north of Sonoma and a little bit on the east side of that part of California as well. We get a lot of fruit from that region of the country. It's a tremendous growing region. Lots and lots and lots of fruit on the market to buy for winemaking from there. This is one of my favorite rosés we've ever had. Rosé is a great thing. With the original winemaker was really passionate about educating Dallas people about rosé. Our original menu had 3 wines, a Cabernet, a Sauvignon Blanc, and a rosé. He wanted everybody to understand that it's not what it looks like. It's not sweet. It's not syrupy. It's a lovely, dry, rather sophisticated glass of wine. So I want you all to come up and grab one and we can share it.
First book, my second full-length collection came out, Dreaming at the Wheel, and I was present because I wanted to hear Andrew's composition called Texas Towns and Cities, and I was amazed, dumbfounded, and slightly out of touch with reality after listening to this marvelous music that Andrew created for the new music ensemble at University of Texas. And I don't remember the details exactly of our first encounter, but I think, if memory serves, that Andrew came up to me and said something that poets have been told for thousands of years. If I pay you, will you just shut up? I don't know, okay. It took, I think, a nanosecond to make a decision on that point. And I don't know if you can hear it, but this was 1988, but right now, somewhere, Bob Dylan is writing a new song called, what's that? What did I think it was trying to do? It's been a long time, and I started, adding a little bit to what was then called Four Texas Songs.
Yeah, we weren't sure what the title would be.
And I guess things really ramped up about 3 years ago, correct?
Maybe less time than that. Maybe a couple of years ago. It's been very recently that this project got off the ground. So maybe I can step in at this point and tell you that I was born in Texas in a town which no longer exists, a town called New Gulf, which used to be the home of the Texas Gulf Sulphur Company, and nobody lived there except people who worked for the company. It's a wonderful little town, actually. I got a good education there, and the one piano teacher there in town actually was a really trained musician, and I mean, I owe her really big time because that opened the door of music to me in a serious way. And then we moved to Beaumont, where I got to, because we lived on the wrong side of town, where all the industries paid big money to the school district, and we had very luxurious music programs there. We had an orchestra, we had a band. I learned to play the trombone, I learned to play the cello. I got to experiment with all kinds of instruments there, and they even would let me try out my fledgling composition ideas by putting them in our school orchestra folders, and they'd read them, and I'd say, that doesn't sound too bad, or oh, that doesn't work at all. And so I got to try out stuff. Originally, my ambition, I wanted to be Frank Lesser or Richard Rogers. I wanted to write Broadway shows. That was my original ambition. And but Dallas plays a key role in my life, oddly enough, because we always used to come here for our all-state orchestra, where I usually was last chair cello in the 30th cello section of the huge orchestra. And one year they said, we're going to have a composition contest next year. And so I decided I would enter. And I entered, and I won second prize in the composition contest. And that meant that I got a reading of my piece. And when they brought down the baton on the first notes of my piece, a shiver went up my neck because it sounded precisely as I had imagined it. And I thought, I can do that? You know, I can imagine that in my head, and it really turned out the way I thought. And that's the moment that I actually knew that I have to do this. This is what I need to do. I knew I was a composer in that moment because that's the thing that people who don't compose can't understand how we do it. And I don't understand it either, you know, but I'm awfully glad. So I've spent so that was 1957. So flash forward 30 years to the piece he was talking about, this piece called Memories of Texas Towns and Cities. And there's a little map on the back which tells you that the cities depicted are Sour Lake, Vidor, Houston, Laredo, and Wink. And each of these is a kind of little mini tone poem of reacting to poems by an old high school friend of mine who I couldn't imagine how to set his music to, I couldn't imagine using his words and having them sung, but I did want to do something reacting to these poems. So that's the work that Charles heard, and I really liked that piece a lot. And it was written originally for a group in Philadelphia that gave a rather bad performance of it. And then Dan Wilcher at the University of Texas heard about the piece and really was excited about it. And he gave a very good performance of it, and complete with slides that went along with it. And the poet was there reading his poems, and it was a whole multimedia show. And I got a review that I've always treasured. It said, Texas depicted perhaps for the first time with a genuinely modernist sensibility. And so that made me really happy. So that's where we met. And I don't know whether I already had your volume, Dreaming at the Wheel, but either I acquired it shortly after, or I already knew it, I think, maybe at the time. I can't remember the circumstances.
I don't remember.
But the 4 poems that you will hear in the piece that we are collaboratively involved in here, these are the ones that originally immediately attracted me. And I had this in the back of my mind of wanting to do this project. But there always needs to be an outlet. I'm not a composer who gets up and says, you know, I've never written a trumpet sonata. I really should do that. But if some trumpet player came to me and said, I like your music, I wish you'd write something for me, then I get inspired. You know, I don't have a string quartet because no string quartet ever asked me, you know. But I guarantee you I would be so inspired as soon as the Juilliard Quartet walked up and said, here's a commission, you know. So I need to know the actual personalities of the people that I'm writing for. So I really owe Maria greatly for this because she played my violin sonata a couple of seasons ago, and she contacted me and said, I really like your music and we'd like to do something else. And I said, well, I have this project that's been on the back burner for all these many years, and it's been more than 20 years now since we first had the idea that we might do this, you know, and then we were not geographically or in any other way in touch with each other, but I always had in the back of my mind that I would want to do this, you know, and so the opportunity presented itself, and so here we are 20 years later with the piece that we eventually decided to just give the title of Charles' original volume here, Dreaming at the Wheel, which I think is a marvelously, I hope all of you have not had that experience, of almost falling asleep while driving someplace, but that's what the meaning of that is, of course. And so here it is, Dreaming at the Wheel, 4 poems by Charles Behlen. And I heard a rehearsal this morning, and after a few playthroughs and after everybody began to be friendly with each other, it's beginning to sound really, really good. So, you know, as a composer, you never know until they bring down the baton whether you got it right or not. You know, it's always that's the hard thing. You have to, well, until very recently, every time I would start a piece, I would get a little ways into it, and I would say to myself, I thought I knew how to do this, you know? And then finally I realized that if I ever cease to have that feeling, I probably should hang it up. Because that's what the whole thing is. You have to be willing to just step off into the void and see where it goes. It's not like following a plan when you write. I'm sure making a poem is the same way. You got an idea of what you'd like to say, but you can't lay out a plan and then you build the plan and then you say, oh, success. No, you have to, it's much more like taking a trip. I kind of like to go north, but I'm not quite sure how to get there. So you just head out in that direction, and then you'll find something much more interesting that way. But it's really scary, you know. It takes a certain kind of daring to be able to do that. And finally, now in my 75th birthday year, I am finally comfortable with doing that. I like the whole idea. I just think, well, I don't know where the hell I'm going, but we'll see, you know. And I trust that I'll have enough sense to not take too many wrong turns, you know. Anyway, I'm really happy that this has finally come together here. And what do you want to say about the actual poems that we're doing here?
That in order to distinguish between the book, Dreaming at the Wheel, and Andrew's composition, I've been referring to it as Dreaming at the Wheel, the musical. I'm just sorry that Ethel Merman is dead, because I think she could have really belted out a good version. I have that book. I don't know if this is the time to read and discuss it. If so, we can.
I'd love to have you read the poems that we used.
Well, you know, the poet Paul Valery said, poems as pretty much as they would exist, as they will exist, word for word, are in this book.
You know, I should probably give back to you my copy of your book, which is now totally fallen apart because I've been using it while I'm working, and it has all my pencil scribblings in the margins about what my notes were in reaction to remind myself what I wanted to do. So you should probably own that. I don't need it anymore.
Fresh copies in that little white box there, so you will leave here with a copy of the book. I think that the first...
Look down, that's the ground, before I begin to imagine what notes would go with those words. So I probably at this point remember your poems at least as well as you remember them, maybe better.
After what is not really probably 20 years, but more like around 25, you probably can. And that's quite a compliment considering how I've memorized most of my work over the years, not from egotism, but just from compulsive obsessive revision. First, there are two people, one identified and one unidentified, who stand behind the first 3 poems in Dreaming at the Wheel, but the person who is identified is my paternal grandfather, referred to as Paws by my side of the family, Robert William Behlen, who was a German farmer who was born in 1893 or 94, died in 1977, and had the distinction with a number of German farmers of upending millions of years of West Texas surface geography in the first part of the 20th century. And thinking about what I was going to say today, it suddenly occurred to me that sometimes the people who have the largest impact upon you aren't the, as far as grandparents or family members in general, aren't the ones who wrestle you to the floor as a child and give you little tummy raspberries and hug and kiss you every time they see you and tell your parents on the phone, no, I'm not spoiling him, tell him the drum set is on the way. Or rather, it's the person who is aloof, silent, who withholds everything. And my grandfather, he expressed his relationship with me in what I might call a sniffy dismissiveness. Now I'd ask my grandfather, well, how do you take seeds out of cotton, Grandpa? And he goes, how do you eat chewing tobacco? Do you swallow it or what? Grandpa, if I go over there and make that rattlesnake a pet, will I be fun? You know, it's like nothing. I got nothing from this guy. And I hope that some of that, the resonance of that silence has been captured in the poem. Grandfather encountered in Elmwood Cemetery. The wind points the grass another way, where I find you hiding under a stone that is knee-high, like the kitchen chairs you edged around when I played hide and seek. You never found me. You never looked. You stared out to your fields for rain. Now I stand in my overhead and search for my car. Our eyes cannot meet and we have no words. Where the grass, your grass, points another way.
Comes under the heading, How to Know When You Are in West Texas. Look down. Oh, excuse me, I'm already screwed it up. Look up, that's the sky. Look down, that's the ground. Now, look straight ahead. See how the two just stare at each other? They've been married for years. They hate it. They're too old to divorce. They take it out on the children.
This poem and the second one was originally a series of poems of several pages. There was how to make love in West Texas, how to make a ham sandwich in West Texas, and I culled the stinkers and kept what I thought were the top two. As I said, two people, one named, one identified, and one unidentified, stand behind these two poems. The second one should be dedicated to my Cherokee Baptist grandmother, who was as taciturn, as laconic as my grandfather. As a matter of fact, if you had asked them if they were taciturn and laconic, they wouldn't have had a damn thing to say to you about it.